We are beginning this too, the time is 12:34:39.
Counselor, let me clarify something. I think I'm speaking a little over what you're expecting, and it's from practice because it's something I address all the time. When I say Clemis, I also mean lean. Clemis is,
Okay.
lean is the main law enforcement information network. Clemis is the records management company that we use through lean. It's all part of the same cable, in other words, same thing. So I want to clarify that.
Yeah, one's the system, the other one's the company that manages it. But from your perspective, you asked the
Everything's
management
Clemis
company.
to me, right?
And I understood
So
that.
that's, I just want to clarify that.
I appreciate
it. In the car, there's nothing you can't print, you can't access, you have to go back and redo. So go ahead.
Okay, that's fine. Fair enough. Could you go to Exhibit 3, item number 4 on page 3. And what was requested was, please provide for inspection and copying any and all correspondence, memoranda, or other documents which in any way analyze or discuss the strategy and procedure regarding, referring, or in any way relating to this investigation. Did I see that right? Read
Yes.
that correctly?
Yes, sir.
It says no such materials exist.
That's correct.
Okay, now, would materials have likely existed in close time proximity to the original, the event, the incident?
That being specifically materials that analyze or discuss the strategy and procedure regarding or in any way relating to this investigation, correct?
Yeah, that's what it is. And what I'm trying to understand is, were there likely to have been materials that just made through the normal course of purging of information no longer exist, or is it unlikely that that information ever existed?
It's probably unlikely that it never existed. If it existed and was available, you would have received it. There's no correspondence, memoranda, or any other documents in any way that analyzed anything or discussed strategy or procedure regarding this investigation.
But I'm asking a slightly different question. I think you answered two other
Yes.
questions. I'm just wondering, is that because maybe it wasn't maintained at the time? It might have existed, but had been purged at the time it was asked for, the normal
No.
police operation? Or is it you saying that it's unlikely that such materials ever existed?
It's unlikely such materials ever existed.
Would it be unusual for detectives or whatever to have memos or correspondence back and forth amongst each other with respect to an investigation?
It would be unusual.
When did the department close out the investigation into the death of Miss Romain?
Technically, I don't believe it's closed. It's stagnant but open. If someone were to bring in more information or any information that we could assist Grosse Pointe Woods, that Grosse Pointe Woods could assist us in the investigation, we'd be more than willing to take a look at it. So is it technically closed? Is it dormant? Yes.
Okay. When did it become dormant?
After the last piece of information was received and investigated.
Do you know approximately when that was?
January, February of 2010.
So essentially for the last 6.5 years, no new information has come in.
Correct.
But it's not closed.
It's not closed.
Now, am I correct, and I'm still new to this case, that the department concluded that this was a suicide, likely to be a suicide? Is that correct?
That's our our number one, I don't want to say determination, but that's our best choice right at this time, yes.
Now, do you understand what the phrase more likely than not means?
Yes,
Greater than 51%.
right.
Would you say, is it the department's position that is more likely than not that it was a suicide, or of the available choices, that's the one with the highest percentage and maybe below 50%?
Based on the investigation, more than likely it was a suicide.
Okay. What is the policy of the department with respect to, strike that, is an investigation ever closed?
With an arrest and a conviction,
Okay. Where there is not believed to be a criminal act, is an investigation ever closed?
well, yes, if the victim dies, it would depend on it would depend on the investigation. It would depend on what type of investigation.
Well, why?
You're being kind of broad here. There's a difference. Is the case cold or is it closed? It's closed with an arrest and a conviction. If no further information is received, it's basically a cold case.
But what about for a non-criminal activity? I mean, you're not going to have an arrest and a conviction per se. Like for a car accident, does an investigation of a car accident get closed?
Normally, yes,
Okay. But
after it's adjudicated,
okay. But this
if there's an adjudication.
but in this case, it is not closed.
No, sir.
Why is it not closed at this point?
Because it's cold. I think it's semantics here. It's closed meaning done. Done. I'm telling you that if someone were to come in with information, credible information and or evidence that would lead to us changing our mind or going in a different direction, we would be more than willing to take a look at it.
You could say the same thing even of a car accident, that you think you know what happened if somebody came in after the fact and said, hey, we found out that somebody severed the brake line. It's something you didn't know. That would be the same thing, right?
You're comparing apples and oranges, but you could say that, yeah.
I'm just trying to, draw a distinction down whether, is there really a difference between cold and closed? Even for a closed file, if somebody came in with information after the fact, that could still be reopened, correct?
Yes, you could always open a file.
So is there any real distinction between closed and cold
Yes,
for a civil, for a non-criminal matter, shall we say?
I'm sure there is. I can't think of anything at the moment.
Is there any practical difference?
I don't deal with civil to begin with.
I didn't mean civil. What I meant is a non-criminal act, an accident, something like that. Is there any practical difference between a cold and a closed matter?
It would depend on the case. Not necessarily if it's criminal or civil. It would depend on each case whether it was criminal or civil.
Why wasn't this case closed?
Why isn't it closed?
Yeah. What's the department's reason for why it's not closed? I'm asking on behalf of the department. Why is that case not closed as opposed to cold?
There's a family that still believes it wasn't what we have determined it likely to be. So I would guess out of respect for that family, if more information, new credible information is presented, we would proceed accordingly.
But I think
I can tell you this, it would be closed if there was a suicide note and an autopsy that verified the note, then we would close it. We don't have that in this case.
So you'd agree the autopsy does not establish that this was a suicide?
Autopsies usually don't determine, let me correct that. Nothing in that autopsy has given me anything else to believe what we still tend to believe. The 51% you're getting at.
Oh, yeah, but there isn't anything in the autopsy that confirms or refutes that this is a suicide, correct?
There's nothing correct, but there's nothing in that autopsy that says it was a criminal act either.
Not asking what it is. I'm just saying there's nothing in there you would agree that at least on taken by themselves, those autopsy results are inconclusive as to whether it's a suicide or a homicide, correct? Item number 5. It says, please provide for inspection and copying any and all documentation detailing the training officers are required to complete in order to appropriately conduct an investigation such as this one, and the frequency the officer required to repeat and or continue said training. Did I read that correctly?
You read it correctly.
Do you understand what that's asking for?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so was it vague to you what was asking for?
Well, let me just
Hold on,
indicate-
I asked the witness. I mean,
Well, that's okay. As you know, I wrote the objection.
okay, but that doesn't matter. I asked
Well,
the
it doesn't
witness.
matter if it's vague to him or not. It's vague as a matter of law.
No, I'm sorry. It matters whether it's vague to the witness. We can have a disagreement. I'm asking the witness. Was that request vague to you?
Yes.
Oh, now it's vague to you because your counsel coached you to say that it was vague, right?
I don't remember. I don't think I responded before I said yes.
I believe I asked you if it was vague. You said no.
No, I didn't. I looked at him.
Well,
No,
maybe
I
we
did
should-
not answer. You want
that's
to play
fine.
it back? I
And
did
what-
not answer that question.
That's fine. In what way is it vague? What is it about that? I asked you if you understood what I was asking for. What is it about that request that you don't understand or that's vague?
Because in investigations such as this one, we don't receive, there isn't a whole lot of training on suicides. There's training on how to respond to the family and how to come to that conclusion. There's no suicide training.
Well, but
So if you wanted me to present to you a certificate from an officer's file that showed he had suicide training, to the best of my knowledge, there is no certification on training for a suicide. And this has always been our number one determination at this point.
what's the procedure of the company, what's the procedure of the department to determine whether a disappearance of a person is a suicide?
To conduct a thorough investigation and utilize every resource at our availability to do a thorough investigation.
So does that include not making a judgment that it's a suicide? Strike that. You'd agree there was no suicide note here, right?
That's correct.
So you'd agree that at first glance, the department couldn't know whether it was a suicide, homicide, or an accident, right?
Correct.
Okay. So would it be the procedure of the department to be open to all of those possibilities? Let's strike that. Is there anything besides 3 possibilities, homicide, suicide, or accident, that you could think of?
Not that I can think of right
Okay.
now.
So investigators first coming down would generally not reasonably know which of the 3 it is, correct?
Correct. Initially,
Okay.
it wasn't.
And so is it fair to say the department policy would be to cover all possibilities until such time as you're able to exclude or advance one of those possibilities?
That's called a thorough investigation.
Okay. So when it asked here the training at first glance, before anybody thought that there was a suicide, the department training in terms of how to treat a homicide scene would have also been relevant, correct?
Well, let me just object to the form of your question right now. That's entirely different from the question number 5. It doesn't say anything about your initial thoughts or a time frame with respect to the question number 5, and you have just indicated a specific time frame other than the vagueness of the lack of time frame. Object to the form.
George, with all due respect, please let me speak. Speaking objections are not allowed in federal court. If you want to object to form or foundation, that's totally reasonable. But the speaking objection that you just gave is inappropriate. You've done it so far in the past, and I'm just asking you, please limit it to form or foundation.
Well, you can ask me whatever you want, and I'm giving you my form and foundation objection and why it's objectionable. So if you choose to cure it, you may.
I can ask you if I would like you to give me the information, but you're not allowed to voluntarily recite.
No, don't lecture me.
I'm just telling
I
you.
know the
just-
rules, you know the rules. Let's move on, because we will be done by 4.
George, you just gave a very long speaking objection that was totally inappropriate. And I'm asking you not to do so. Will you agree not to do so and limit your objection to form a
I
foundation?
will not allow you to advise me or suggest how I will represent my clients,
That's
nor
fine.
will I advise you of same.
Got the number for the court? Do you have the number for the court? Let's look it up. We need to call the court and ask them to clarify on this because it's just unreasonable what you just did.
I know the rule. Let's move on.
But you're not following the rule.
Are we going to move on or not?
We're going to call. Are you going to object just with form or foundation? I'll tell you what. I've explained to you my concern. You're allowed to object form or foundation. If you continue objecting, then I'll have to call the court and get the court to rule on it. That's all. We'll move on. Now, I'll come back to you just said when you first that the policy would have been to conduct a thorough investigation, which would have been the possibility of suicide, homicide, or accident. Correct?
And the leads that lead up to that type of investigation, correct?
That's fine. Now, when I asked you before what was vague about item number 5, you said to me, you know, a policy for conducting a suicide investigation. Well, that would have been much further down the road, wouldn't it have been? Because when the investigation first started, you wouldn't have known whether it was a homicide, a suicide, or an accident.
Objection, form foundation.
Join.
I'll tell you what, I'll give you a standing order. Objection 1 is for objection for all. You don't have to.
Would you like to know why?
I may ask. If I want to, I'll ask you. But you can answer.
We responded to an emergency a rescue operation. The first clues at the scene showed that there, more than likely, 51%, that there was a body in the water. We went into rescue mode and continued that for a couple hours.
Chief, I'm not trying to.
That's where, no, you're asking me to explain something without letting me explain it.
Then by all means, please.
The first clues at the scene showed a single set of footprints across from the car into the water. Sit down, slide to this next level, and into the water. We went into rescue mode. Then we covered all the bases. We did a search of the grounds, a very thorough search of the grounds, the water, everything we could, including interviews the next day, and that's how we proceeded. We didn't get down there and say, is this going to be we went rescue mode first, because as you are aware, counselor, with hypothermia, you can survive in the water for as long as an hour, maybe more, in that kind of condition. And those are the conditions that were present. We went into a rescue mode.
Chief, I wasn't asking you about, I'm not trying to, I'm not even
I
at
think
that
I know
point.
where you're going, but go ahead.
No.
Why don't you rephrase the question?
I'm asking you about item number 5.
Right.
You said to me, I asked you, was it unclear what we were looking for? You said no, and then you said it was vague. And I asked you why it was vague, and you said to me, because we don't have policies of dealing with a suicide situation. And that's what I went into and asked you, but you didn't know it was a potential suicide when you first got there. You just said you went into rescue mode. So let's just take that. Isn't there some kind of training of what people are supposed to do when you arrive at a scene and need to go into rescue mode?
Sure, it's basic training. You get it at the police academy.
That's fine, but don't you think that would have been covered by item number 5?
You know, number 5.
Just
No, let me
something.
refer to question
Could you
5
do
for you.
something for me for 1 second? Take your time, but read through number 5.
I did.
And I just want you to answer the question that if you went in there in rescue mode, my question to you is, would training of how to deal with a rescue situation be covered by question number 5? That's all. Think about it, and if you need to read it,
So
that's
are you asking me?
Argumentative.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
If you're asking me if I went into, is there training on ice rescue or search the water type training?
Yeah.
Yes, we have it.
Okay, so don't you think that would be responsive to request number 5?
I think you've got that material.
I'm going by what's written here in the
I'm going by
response.
what my attorney answered. Okay? I'm going by what I was instructed to do by my attorney. You were given the materials. There is no training materials for a suicide. From the minute they got there, we knew a woman went in the water. We knew a person was in the water. That we based on the first evidence at the scene, we determined there was a great possibility that someone had gone in the water. We went into rescue mode.
That's fine, and all I'm asking is, do you think that training on how to deal with rescues, water rescues, would be covered by item number 5?
I guess it could be.
Okay, Do you think that training on how to deal with a possible crime scene would be covered under item number 5?
That training is dealt with in the police academy.
But do you think that that would be covered by item number 5? I'm not talking about where it's
Well,
covered.
that's where the vagueness comes in, because if it's covered at the police academy, it's covered in a whole broad 16 weeks of training. So to ask for training on other than what we immediately did on a on a search and a rescue operation, that's all I can tell you.
But you didn't quite answer.
I'm telling you it was vague because what you're asking for, A, either doesn't exist, or you didn't specifically ask for what training are you requesting. There is no training for suicide, to how to conduct a suicide investigation. There is training on investigations, period, that is acquired at the police academies and subsequent training supplied thereafter.
You said that next morning there was interviews with witnesses, correct?
The detectives did the interviews the next day.
Okay. Were they recorded in any way?
No. We don't record witness interviews
How are they documented?
with a witness statement and in the general notes and supplemental reports.
Okay.
I must object. There's too much thought going into this question.
Oh, you saw the smoke?
I heard the wheels.
No, these are blocks. I haven't progressed to wheels yet. We could do the Texas methodology. I'll tell you that later. I know I probably asked this, and I think you don't know the answer, and that's fine, but the department does not know how long the mobile entry logs are maintained by Clemens, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you know approximately how long the active investigation for Ms. Romain's death elapsed?
Well, define active.
Or there's basically, before it became cold, shall we say?
Well, I'd have to check the papers, but after the last witness was interviewed and any material gained thereby, statements were investigated, and there was nothing more to read, no one else left to speak with, it started to go cold.
That would have been certainly after she had been found and the autopsy performed and everything like that, correct?
Not necessarily. When she was found, the investigation continued because of autopsies that were done, the autopsy that was done, and interviews with the Ontario Provincial Police on scene with the detectives.
No, that's what I'm saying. So it had to be at least that long that the investigation continued.
After that, we received no other information, correct?
Okay.
So that would have been March 20th.
What?
Oh, no.
When the,
It's on the child's side. Is it getting emails?
Yes.
Have you located one of those Pokemon things or what is that one?
Yeah, it's probably in this room.
I'm going to swallow this room, but I think that requires absolute brain activity.
You know
Listen,
what? I'd probably stipulate to that.
Listen, when I was in school, we played tag, which was the assassination game where you had people, you know, it was on campus, and you had people, and, you know, you had like,
Paintballs or whatever the.
it was all that kind of stuff. You know, you would tie a crepe paper thing if you want to burn down somebody's house. It got there, and you put crepe paper around the house and stuff. That was burning it down and stuff. Anyway, those were the bad old days. Okay.
We just fought.
Is there any kind of either procedure or training in terms of how to try to distinguish between a homicide and a suicide?
That would be training that was provided in the basic police academy and any subsequent investigative training that the detectives would receive in the evidence tech schools and any other schools they went to.
So, I mean, you said it would have been, but is there? I'm asking, is
There's
there
training, of course there is.
to determine between suicide and homicide?
There's training to recognize certain signals or certain evidence, yes.
Okay. And so that's regular training that everybody receives in the police academy?
Basically, yes.
Okay. But I think you said there are specific postgraduate courses in.
There's further advanced training in evidence tech schools.
Okay, did any of the detectives working on the case receive that advanced training?
Yes, sir.
Which detectives?
All of them.
Did they get any materials associated with that training?
Oh, I'm sure they did.
Does the department have a policy of what happens to materials that a detective receives as part of any advanced training he receives?
No, sir.
So they're free to keep it or toss it as they see fit?
Yes, sir.
Did anybody ask any of the detectives whether they had any of those training materials?
I have no knowledge of that. You'd have to ask them. I did not ask them.
Were you, on behalf of the department, the conduit of information from the department to your counsel?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Could such a request have been made without your knowledge
For
to the detectives?
information?
If I asked you if anybody asked the detectives, do they have any of those training materials? You said you don't know. Maybe did I ask that? Maybe my mind's okay. Did anybody in the department, in preparation for producing documents in this case, go to any of the detectives who are involved in this case, whether a defendant or not, and ask them if they had any training materials that would be relevant to what happened, to the investigation that took place with respect to Miss Romain?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Would that be a hard thing to do, at least for the people who are still here?
I don't know why they would do it.
Sorry?
I don't know why would they? I mean, would one of my officers go to a detective and say, hey, do you have any training materials that you received in the academy that I can use in this investigation? Is that what you're asking?
No, no. To
Okay.
respond to this request, to respond to request number 5.
Oh, okay.
Do you think it would have been difficult to ask the people involved in this case, do you in your possession have any training materials relevant to the kinds of investigation we did in this case?
No, I do not.
Okay. specific. Keep that one first. I am going to hand you. Need a second? Chief, I'm going to hand you what I'm marking as exhibit number 5,
Thank you.
which is the defendant, City of Grosse Pointe Farms, answers to plaintiff's second set of interrogatories. Have you seen this document before?
Yes, I have.
I'm going to also mark as exhibit number 6. Which is entitled Defendant Jensen's Answers to Plaintiff's First Interrogatories. Have you seen that document before?
Yes, sir, I have.
Okay. Now, was there also a specific answer on behalf of Grosse Pointe Farms?
To what?
The interrogatories, I'm sorry, I see Defendant Jensen's answers to plaintiff's first interrogatories. Was there also a separate answer on behalf of Grosse Pointe Farms?
I don't know, you tell us. I've got defendant City of Grosse Pointe Farms answers to plaintiff's second set of interrogatories,
I know,
which
I'm-
seemingly indicates to me there was a first
First
set.
set.
And that's why I'm asking, is
Right.
there that's why I'm asking, I have a first set answered by Jensen, and I'm asking, is there a separate response from Grosse Pointe Farms?
Well, let's see what what exhibit are you referring to? 5?
Exhibit 6.
Exhibit 6. Let me see 6.
I'm sorry, is exhibit 6?
My first set of
Oh,
interrogatories.
first, I thought you said second.
No, that's.
Okay.
this is
Jensen's
Grosse Pointe Farms.
first, I don't know. You would know if there was one directed to the farms as a first set, but obviously this is directly specifically to him.
Okay, we're not going
And
to ask
they're-
about that because he's not here today as a fact witness, so we'll leave that
Right.
one. We'll leave that one alone for now.
I'm sorry. Is there a distinction here? Did you need to call him back as a fact about other?
Absolutely. We didn't notice him as for deposition. We noticed the 30B6 deposition,
But
Most
correct me if I'm wrong, counsel, but haven't you asked him fact-specific questions about the underlying criminal case?
not as a general proposition, no.
I'm not
I've
asking as
asked-
a general proposition, I'm asking as a specific, we can go back and take a look at the
Have
questions.
there been some questions? Of course, but that's to establish policies and procedures. So no, we're going to be recalling him as a fact witness.
Well, I'm going to object to same right now because I think you've blended the two already.
That's fine. That's fine. You may
That's
go.
right.
You may go ahead and do so.
That's
We'll let the
fine.
court. We'll let the court decide. But you can't take that I have asked him certain questions to put it into context of this particular case, and say that now I've taken him as a fact witness.
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, you are suing him individually. You have named him as a
Right.
defendant, presumably because he has facts that you want to know.
Okay.
You've noticed his deposition. He was identified also as the 30B6 rep.
Correct.
In your questioning, you have asked him questions both about policy and about the facts of the investigation.
Only to put the policies into context.
Regardless.
Yeah, that's fine. Listen, we have every intention of noticing up as a fact witness, as a party, and if you guys want to object, by all means, go ahead and object. But this is a 30B6, this is the person you chose to put up, but I can't ask.
So I didn't choose him.
Well, okay, whoever was chosen, he was chosen as this witness, and we're going to go and we'll deal with that.
All right.
That's fine.
Just as Solomon may tell you, may remind you, you may want to reserve some time then, because the court is likely to see it differently. And
We would
limit
get
it
through- first of all-
well, let me finish what I'm saying, and limit your total time with Director Jensen to 7 hours on the record, which is what's likely to happen, regardless of how you choose to use that time.
I don't see how that happens. We're entitled to a 30B6. We're entitled we're entitled to at least 7 hours.
Okay.
Because we could take him as a fact witness. They chose to put him up as 30B6. We'd get additional time. Maybe she won't give us a full 7 hours. Whatever. We'll see. We'll worry about that.
There are specific answers, first interrogatories to the
Okay.
City of Grosse Pointe Farms
That's fine.
that were responded to on or about October 19th, 2015.
That's fine.
You see them?
But we won't deal with those today.
You don't want to deal with those today?
Well, the first,
Maybe you don't.
unfortunately, I don't have a copy of it, so. There was a mix.
Solomon has given you incomplete documentation.
No, he's not.
Oh, he's not here to
It's
defend
not
himself.
Solomon, it is I, so leave Solomon out of it. But I can maybe deal with it anyway, but we'll see. Okay.
It's all right, it's all on the record.
Chief, well, strike that. You signed the responses to exhibit number 5, the interrogatories, correct?
That's correct.
Let's go to number 3 for a second.
On Exhibit 5?
Yes, we're only going to talk about exhibit 5 for right now. If you want to take a couple seconds to yourself and just read.
Thank you.
Okay, you read the response also? Okay. Now, do you see the objection to number 3?
Yes?
Overly broad, vague, ambiguous, and unduly burdensome. See that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How did you determine, first of all, do you understand what request number 3 was asking for
Mm-hmm.
on behalf of the company? And as the person who signed, on behalf of the department, as the person who signed, do you understand what number 3 was asking for?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a yes? Sorry, gotta
That's
be verbal.
correct. I'm sorry, yes.
Okay. Can you explain to me how that request is vague?
Well, the Coast Guard was on scene a couple of times. First of all, I believe it was answered, but where you're going as far as overly vague, that was the determination made by my attorney. But we did respond to the question.
Well, I don't know, did you provide a complete response to that question? Is there anything more that you didn't provide?
No?
So, is it fair to say the objection is just some words that really? Let me ask the question.
Let me answer
Is there anything more in response to interrogatory number 3 that you didn't answer in number 3?
No.
Now, it says here that the team may have discussed. It didn't say did discuss.
They may have.
So are there no records?
The conversations that the officer had with the Coast Guard when they were on scene, there's no records of those.
Okay. Who did you go to ask whether anybody spoke to the Coast Guard?
Lieutenant Andy Rogers.
Well, it says other than Lieutenant Rogers.
Well, it's other than, and the answer is if you were to go to the, obviously you haven't read Trupiano's deposition, but it was explained in that, regarding that answer, that it was determined that Lieutenant Andrew Rogers notified the Coast Guard. It continues here, what it says is that if the Coast Guard on scene had some questions with the dive team on what search pattern they wanted to use, where they had been, what did they wanted to do, there are no records of that.
Okay.
That's kind of addresses the vagueness. There's no question in here that specifically designed to elicit an answer on what they discussed when they were on scene.
For item number 5. B asked, did anyone perform any DNA testing on the vehicle for possible forensic evidence? If so, please identify the individuals who performed the testing and why or why not. Department answered upon information and belief, no, but then did not answer why or why not.
What's your question?
Why didn't the department perform any DNA testing on the vehicle for possible forensic evidence?
There's a missing person. There's no sign, no evidence of any kind of violent crime that would warrant a DNA check. They did process the car for prints.
Didn't you say as a proposition that on arriving on a scene such as that, the department would have no knowledge whether it was a homicide, suicide, or accident?
We have, until everyone was interviewed, we had a person in the water and it went to a missing person. And we conducted a thorough investigation on the missing person. At no time did we come across any evidence that would warrant a DNA test. One article of clothing was found and it was denied at the scene by a family member that it belonged to the victim. Why would we do a DNA test on the inside of the vehicle? We had no evidence, suspicions of any kind that it was a crime scene.
Need to take a break for a second. I'm going to consult with counsel.
I put a call into Jeff at his chambers to see if we can clarify this issue. And we'll be calling you back soon.
Which issue?
What issue?
Whether or not this is, I mean, if you can surprise us with this being the only chance we're going to get with the 30B6 witness. And that also being the only
Well,
opportunity.
listen, you
Hard to see
can.
how it's a
We didn't know it was going to be here
Right.
until we showed up. We're not prepared to take this step today. We're still waiting on other.
Time is 1:24:56, one marker.
Item E, were pictures of the vehicle's back hunch trunk taken? The response was no, but why or why not was not answered. So why weren't pictures of the back hatch trunk taken?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
So the police department doesn't know. Remember, you're answering on behalf of the police department now. I just want to
I
remind you.
didn't process the car.
It's not a question whether you process the car. The question is this is an answer being given on behalf of the department? So I need the department's answer.
I don't know.
So the department doesn't know.
The department doesn't know.
Okay. If this had been thought to be a crime scene, would it have been appropriate to take? Would the policy of the department have been to take pictures of the trunk and the inside of the trunk and things of that nature?
Depending on what possible evidence they could have got if it was a crime scene.
If it, like you to assume for a second, it was a crime scene, would it have been the department's procedure to have taken pictures of the trunk and the inside of the trunk?
Possibly.
What would it depend on?
Evidence found at the scene. Potential of any evidence being recovered inside the vehicle in the trunk. The trunk was searched. found in a trunk, they might have taken a picture then.
Okay. So you're saying the policy would have been to only have taken pictures if evidence had been found?
There's no policy on what to do at a crime scene. You're asking me about policy. There's no policy what to do at a crime scene. It's dictated by what you see and what you're taught to do with what you see. Evidentiary proceedings.
Is there a policy and procedure, strike that, does the department have in-house canine capability?
Now or then?
Objective form.
At the time, in 2010?
Yes.
You did, okay. Were there any policies and procedures on when canine units would be deployed?
No. Not by my department.
Well, so there was no guidelines whatsoever? Strike that. Tell me about the canine capability of the department in 2010.
There was one canine, Raleigh, a German Shepherd that was in custody and control of the City of Grosse Point's Public Safety Department.
And so that belongs to the city, but not to the department.
The policies do, correct.
Not the policy. I mean the dog
We
itself.
share the dog.
You share the dog. Okay.
Counsel,
Just so you're aware, the city of Grosse Pointe is not the city of Grosse Pointe Farms.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Okay. Too many gross points for New York.
Well, I guess that's why you guys there call it Grossy Pointy as well on Saturday Night Live.
I live in at least I live in a town called Massapequa, which is really matzo pizza because it's all never mind. But okay, so it was owned by the city of Grosse Pointe.
Correct.
If somebody at the department, your department, wanted to make use of the canine patrol, how was such a request made? By whom? And
We would have dispatch contact Grosse Pointe City and request their assistance with their dog, the canine officer and the dog.
And did that happen on occasion?
It did happen on occasion.
Okay. Is that the only dog that was available to the department?
In 2010.
In 2010,
We're talking about 20, and the question I'm really asking is, if for some reason, let's say that the canine was out on another patrol and the department needed a dog, was there another resource to call?
potentially yes. We would have started calling on other departments that are known at the time to have a dog.
Okay. Did that ever happen where you had to go to other places other than the city of Grosse Pointe?
Yes.
Okay. So is it fair to say that if your department wanted a dog, you would have found one from somebody to use for a particular investigation?
We could have.
Was there ever a circumstance where the department wanted a use of a dog and could not get a dog?
Yes.
Is that common?
Yes.
Does it happen more than you get a dog?
I'd say 50% chance.
Are there any guidelines within the department of when to call in a dog?
No.
At what level of person within the department does the request need to come to seek canine support?
A supervisor can call for a canine. The canine officer then makes the determination whether it's appropriate to respond based on his training.
You mean the person who actually has the dog?
Yes.
Okay. If you look at item number 6, question A was, did any relative of JoAnn Matouk Romain retrieve and provide an article of clothing recently worn by Miss Romain to Grosse Pointe Farms Public Safety? Did I read that correctly?
You ready?
I'm sorry, department to assist a scent detecting canine. I didn't read the third line. Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, well, you didn't finish it. Brought to the scene of St. Paul's Church on or after January 12th. You're asking question 6?
A, I was reading. But
Okay, A. Did any relative join with you? Not to my knowledge.
okay, well, it says unknown. So I'm trying to say,
Well,
is the answer?
I answered the question, and it's not to my knowledge, unknown.
Hold on. There's a difference between unknown. Unknown means I have investigated and it didn't happen, or I just simply don't know the answer. I'm trying to figure out which one it is. And remember that you're speaking on behalf of the
Unknown.
department now. So that means you did an investigation and could not determine the answer?
I did an investigation, and I received a negative response.
When you said received a negative, you received no response, or the answer was no?
I received a response that the officers who were on the scene had no knowledge. It was unknown. None of them had any knowledge of being presented, so it's unknown.
But an investigation took place.
Objective form?
When I say an investigation took place, you asked everybody, did this happen, right?
Correct?
And somebody said, not to my knowledge, correct? Okay, so it's not really unknown. The answer is no, isn't it?
No. They could have brought it to one of the members of the Coast Guard, or because when you're in a dive suit, you all look the same. They could have brought it to another member that were there, and I wouldn't have any knowledge of that.
But that's not what it was asking. It was asking Grosse Park Point
That's why it
Farms
says
Public.
unknown.
But that's not what the question wasn't asking about whether it went to the Coast Guard. It was asking specifically about Grosse Point Farms.
Unknown.
So everybody says no, it didn't happen, but you don't know whether it happened or not.
Correct.
Item B, did any employee, agent, or officer of Grosse Point Farms Public Safety Department inform Michelle Romain, Kelly Romain, or anyone else on or after January 12, 2010 that canines can detect scent in cold water? And, by the way, is there any part of that that's vague?
Well, let me just object to your question, asking him to contemplate on why an attorney made a legal objection to your question. It's outside the scope of his knowledge.
I'm sorry, he signed this. He's responsible for what's there.
I think I signed it as well, and I think it says in the preamble of this particular document that George DeGrood III, Esquire, counsel for the defendant, provided objections to the interrogatories as noted.
Okay, but he still has to stand by those objections. It's not, you don't get to just object.
We can fight about that
That's
with
fine. I mean,
respect to the judge at some point in
That's
time
fine.
if we need to.
That's fine. Nevertheless, I'm asking you, as the person who signed this, on behalf of Grosse Point Farms, and as the 30B6, was there any part of B that is vague?
No.
Is there any part that is ambiguous?
No.
Was it particularly burdensome to ask the employees whether they told Michelle Romain that dogs cannot detect scent?
No.
And is it overly broad?
No.
Okay. Did you review these responses?
I certainly did.
Did it cause you any concern that you were signing something that said that that this response was overly broad, vague, ambiguous, and unduly burdensome?
I signed that in conjunction with my attorney.
So is it fair to say that you disavow that statement?
Why would I disavow it?
Well, you just said it wasn't overly broad, it wasn't vague, it wasn't ambiguous, and it wasn't unduly burdensome. So
Are we still on 6?
we're still on 6B.
It says unknown.
No, I asked you about the objection there. I asked you, was 6B overly broad? You said no. You said, was it I asked you if it was vague. You said no. I asked you if it was ambiguous. You said no. I asked you if it was unduly burdensome. You said no. So you would agree that that objection is unfounded, wouldn't you?
Objection asked and answered.
I'll also object as to foundation.
Join.
You can answer.
No.
So you think it's reasonable to object, saying that it is vague, overbroad, ambiguous, and unduly burdensome when you just sat here and told me that it was none of those things?
I'm going to object as to asked and answered, and now arguing with the witness. He's answered it 3, 4, 5 times. We've also placed on the record. You've made your point. Can we move along? Because this is just becoming an argument now.
It's not.
Join.
He's answered it 4 times exactly the same.
No, I asked, he didn't answer the question I said. I asked him. You can answer the question.
I answered no.
So you think that that is totally reasonable to make those objections, even though they're not true?
That's now the 3rd time you've asked that exact same question. He's answered it no 3 times, or 4 times.
fine.
I'm not sure exactly. Now we're getting to the point where you're badgering him. We're on number 6B. We're going to be here all day.
We'll be here until I have 7 hours.
You have 7 hours. That's right. You have 7 hours. If you want to spend all 7 badgering the witness on a particular question, this is going to be. I mean, we will need to talk to the judge.
But that's my problem if I want to use my time, not yours.
You're asking, you're starting to get on a borderline between client and attorney privilege.
No, I'm not, because
Yes, you are,
said.
because I told you, I signed this in conjunction with my attorney.
And I'm
And
asking.
there's reasons why he may have felt, and I may have felt, and I'm telling you, I said no.
Well, that's fine, but you
Okay, that's where we're
understood,
at.
you agree that when you signed your name here, you understood that you were attesting the truthfulness of everything you wrote here, right?
I do.
Okay. Number 7A. 7, who requested that PSO Zielinski travel to a home in Grosse Pointe Woods to retrieve an extra set of keys to the Lexus to JoAnn Matouk Romain was driving the night she disappeared? Did I read that correctly?
Mm-hmm.
It says, A, who informed Grosse Pointe Farms Public Safety Department that an extra set of keys existed? How was the department notified and when? And the department answered, unknown at the present time. Correct?
Correct.
What did the department do to investigate that question?
Let me just object to the form of your question, in so much as that information was covered by the deposition and testimony given by Officer Zielinski. And it's clear from the testimony of Officer Zielinski, A, he testified he could not recall who sent him to the home. B, he could not recall who at the home handed him the keys or any of the specifics other than he saw this as a routine call. That's what all those answers are. I mean, I don't know who else he can ask besides Zielinski as to whether or not.
Well, thank you for coaching him, but I simply asked
I'm not
the question.
coaching him, I'm
Yes,
reading
yes,
the
you are.
answer.
Yes,
Who
you are.
informed the farms that an extra set of keys existed? How was the department notified and when? Unknown.
But you went and just gave a whole speech about a deposition and this and that, and I simply
Look,
asked
we
the
can-
witness. I simply asked the witness, what did the department do to investigate the answer to that question? It's just, and he could answer the question. Your coaching is totally
I am not
inappropriate.
coaching a
Objection
witness.
form, objection foundation.
Objection
Chief,
form, objection
that's
foundation.
great, that's great. Chief-
Objection cumulative, objection badgering, objection argumentative.
There's only two.
Go ahead
there's
and
only two-
answer,
There are only
Director.
2 objections allowed. It's form and foundation. Okay? And privileged. Agreed. This is not privileged. I asked you a very simple question. What did the department do to answer the question?
I asked Officer Zielinski.
Okay? But you say here, unknown at the present time, but yet Officer Zielinski seemed to have the answer, right?
Well, I might have asked him after this was written.
So you asked him after this was written, why would you have not asked him before?
Is this part of policies and procedure?
No, he's burying himself. That's fine. I could care less. But, you know, unknown at the present time. What if all of a sudden Michelle comes forward and says, I gave it to him, or someone else does. We don't know at the time that we write this, but obviously discovery is an ongoing process.
But I asked a very different question. I'm
He
not
told you he asked
criticizing
Zielinski.
after it was written.
He said he may have.
I have.
Okay, well, I'm trying to understand. Okay? This says unknown at the present time, and I'm trying to know what the department did to answer this question. And you said you may have asked Zielinski after you wrote this, right?
I'm yes.
Did you do
Well, I
it?
don't know that for sure. I'm not sure exactly when that information. I asked the detective in charge of the case, and that was determined as already testified under oath in a prior deposition that Zielinski was the one who went and got it. I don't know when that information. I don't believe I had it at the time, but it did come out in another deposition.
And I'm not trying to criticize.
No, I'm just saying. So I'm not sure at the present time if I had that knowledge. I signed it saying I didn't at the present time.
And Chief, I'm not trying to criticize whether you knew it at the time or not. I'm asking a different question. Do you understand that when interrogatories are attested to by somebody, there is an obligation to undertake a reasonable investigation in responding? Do you understand that?
I understand that.
Okay. So my question to you is not, I'm not trying to criticize you whether you knew it at the time or when you knew it or whatever. It's a different thing. It's what did the department do to try to find the answer to that question? That's the only question that I'm asking about. That's all I want to know. It's what did you do? Did you ask somebody? Did you do some research? Whatever it is, that's what I want to know. When you found out about totally different issues.
I asked the detectives that handled the case, and they did not recall.
Okay. Did you do anything else besides asking the detective?
No.
Okay. Is that true for
Detectives.
Detectives. Okay. Is that true for A through D?
Yes.
Okay.
You unplug them?
Need to check something for a second.
You're on my leash. She had that big room in that school right for Chatfield.
Yeah, remember that thing? Wow. It was like 10 times the size of the schoolhouse.
The one we'll use.
The one out in the schoolhouse.
No, I don't think so.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Um, Going back to exhibit number 3, which was the response to the request for production. Item number 13. It asks for, please provide for inspection and copying any forensic testing results regarding, referring to, or in any way relating to this matter. Did I read that correctly?
Correct.
Okay, and it says no such evidence exists.
Correct.
Now, is that a statement that no such evidence exists at this time, or no such evidence ever existed?
No such evidence exists at this time.
Was there evidence in the past responsive to number 13 which no longer exists?
No,
So then it never existed.
never existed.
Okay. Doing it? Okay. Okay, going back to exhibit number 1, which is the deposition notice.
Gotcha.
The 2-volume set of policies that we've talked about multiple times. Okay. Are there, is there any policy and procedure for missing person investigations?
No,
Okay. Are there any policies of the department with respect to missing person investigations, irrespective of what's contained in that 2-volume set?
no.
How does the department conduct missing person investigations?
That would depend.
Okay, depend on what?
Is it an adult or is it a juvenile?
We'll say
How
an
long is the
adult.
person missing? Is there any evidence of an abduction? Is there any of any crime? There's different guidelines set forth by the state, as I'm sure you're aware, on how you conduct between a juvenile and timeframes and an adult. So it would depend.
So now you said that there were guidelines. What are those guidelines?
Well, for instance, an adult, if it's a voluntary missing, there's a 24-hour guidance rule about putting them in the computer.
Are these guidelines written down anywhere?
By the state, I believe.
Do you know what document they're written down in? Is there some specific title that comes to mind?
No, there isn't. I'm sure it's there. I've seen it. It's a guide. I'm not even sure it's a rule. It's a guideline on a missing adult, voluntary missing on an adult.
Does this department abide by the guidelines?
Most of the time.
Oh, bad question. With regard to missing persons, the guidelines we've been talking about, does this department abide by those guidelines?
Depends.
Is there any specific area in which the department would depart from those guidelines as a general proposition?
That would depend.
When I say as a general proposition, I mean all the time. It's an official, we don't do it this way. That's
No,
the way it is.
It would depend.
Okay, so it's a case
It's case by case. Correct.
Okay.
That's a good way to put it.
So the guidelines themselves are just simply that, they're guidelines?
Guidelines.
Okay. Are a copy of those guidelines available in the department anywhere?
I would request them from the Michigan State Police.
Well, it's just that if let's say a patrol person out on the field, how do they become educated on the guidelines? Is it anything more than what they learn in the police academy?
What they learn in the academy and then from experience on the road as officers.
Okay.
And at the guidance of the patrol supervisor.
Homicide investigations. Is there a specific policy or procedure within the department for homicide investigations?
No.
Can we say the same thing about homicide investigations? We were just talking about missing person investigations.
Objective form and foundation.
There's no policy. Grosse Pointe Farms does not have a policy on conducting homicide investigations.
I understand, but we talked about for missing persons, there's no policy either.
no
There's
policy
just,
on
there are
that.
some guidelines, there's general collective experience and
Right.
wisdom. Is the same true for homicide investigations?
It's a totally different investigation. One's a violent crime, one's a missing person.
I understand that. What I'm saying is there a set of guidelines from the state on how to conduct a homicide investigation?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. Receive training on that at the Academy of specifically how to conduct a homicide investigation?
Minimally in the academy.
So how do people learn how to conduct homicide
Evidence
investigations?
technician training.
Okay, so that is specific training that's done.
And continuing training.
Is there any kind of, for lack of a better term, accreditation that the department would have in terms of its technicians, and in terms of its detectives and things like that, that the department is certified, shall we say, to
They
do certain?
receive state accreditation as a evidence technician.
Okay, and are you required to provide evidence to the state of training, activities, continuing education, and things like that in order to achieve and maintain that accreditation?
It's a two-part question. As far as maintaining, I don't believe there's a requirement to maintain any kind of investigative technique on a homicide.
No, I'm not talking homicide. Let's take a step back just so we're clear. These certified evidence technicians
Correct.
that we talked about, they're certified by the state, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Imagine you have to undertake certain training, take tests, do something in order to become certified in the first place, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there a standardized curriculum in the state to achieve that certification?
I'm not aware of it.
How do you, are there specific requirements that you need to meet in order to become certified?
You go to the class. It's a couple-week class, and they teach you the basics in photography, collection of evidence, several different steps that you would not get to that degree at the regular basic police academy. It's a program you graduate from. You receive a certificate, a state certification.
There's people from all over the state that'll come to this thing, correct?
Yes, correct.
Is it given in one location that everybody in the state travels to, or
No.
is it given in multiple locations?
No, it's given in multiple locations.
Is there a standardized curriculum in that, you could take it here, you could take it there, you get the same training?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
Where do the employees of this department go for that training geographically?
Again, it would depend on availability, but most of our training is through Macomb Community College.
Which is where that's
It's the South Campus. At least was.
Is it the one in Grosse
I have not. Yeah,
It's 12 in Grosse Pointe?
Grossbeck or whatever. But it's also available at Schoolcraft College has a police academy. Places that have academies usually will host that.
Gotcha. Is it a certificate that's recognized between the different departments within the state?
I believe so.
So if has it ever happened that a police officer from some other, from the western side of Michigan moves to here and wants to come work for your department? Has that happened?
Yes, it has happened.
Okay, and
His certification carries over.
that's what I'm getting at. So you would expect that there's general principles that apply no matter where you take the class. Otherwise, the certificate would have no meaning,
I
right?
would expect so, but I'm
Okay.
not sure it is.
Okay. Now, is the department itself have any kind of accreditation that, you have a certain number of evidence techs or certain qualifications of evidence techs and the department itself is accredited?
No,
Okay.
not that I'm aware of. No.
So it's all down to the individual level.
Correct.
Do these people have to get recurring training or continuing education requirements to maintain their certification?
Have to? No. Do? Yes.
Okay. Do you get certified for life? Once you're certified forever?
I'm not sure how long the certification's for. I believe it's as long as you're on the job.
Okay. So for homicide investigations, that's where they would get the real working knowledge of how to conduct a homicide investigation. Is that one of these evidence certifications?
That's where they get the basics, correct?
The rest is on the job and experience, correct?
Correct.
Is the policies for, so the practice of a homicide investigation, forget about what's written down, is that generally an experiential wisdom kind of thing that you learn how to do? Is that a fair characterization?
Yes and no. A lot of police work, including that, is learning on the job. However, because we don't have a lot of homicides here, when there is a violent case, particularly a homicide, we call in the state police.
Okay. Is there a policy and a procedure associated with calling in, that you call in state police for a violent crime? Or
I don't believe there's any written policy on when to call them in. That's pretty much dictated on past practice. I've been here 38 years. There's been 3 homicides, and the state police were called in on all 3.
What about other violent crime, not necessarily a homicide?
It would depend on the evidence that's necessary to be processed.
Okay. What about serious accident or stuff like that, where there could be technical issues and stuff like that?
Objective form, meaning a serious accident.
An auto fatality, where it may become, where forensic information may become very important to try to reconstruct what happened. Is that where you would bring in?
Not on an auto accident. I have trained auto accident investigators.
Okay.
There's an 8-part or 8-class certification, at least it was last time I checked. AI, accident investigation 1 through 8. And I
Okay.
have several officers that are trained in that.
Now, what about suicide investigation? Is there anything for suicide investigation?
No.
Have there been many suicides in the city?
Well, a little vague. What is many? In the last 10 years, 20 years?
10 years, how many suicides have there been in the city?
Approximately. In the last 10 years?
Whatever convenient measuring yardstick you want to use.
10? Maybe more.
Is there 100?
No, there's not 100.
So 10 or
It's not uncommon. It's not extremely common either.
couple of year?
A couple of years would be a pretty good guesstimate.
It's pretty much been that way over the whole
Right.
20 years. Any real
Correct.
change?
And backup 1, the last fatal accident we had, because of the complexity, we also called state policing.
Okay. Who makes the decision to bring in some other agency?
Usually the detective lieutenant or the detective on call in conjunction with the supervisor in charge.
Okay.
lunchroom, are we?
No.
It's a little late now, anyways.
Could you take a look through topics A through N? We've talked about A and B, so you can start at C.
Still Exhibit 1.
Still Exhibit 1.
Okay.
And can you tell me which of them there is at least a partial or complete policy and procedure that, handling what, how it should be dealt with?
May he review the index of the policies and procedures?
Absolutely, I want an answer. No, it's not a memory test, and whatever you can use for the answer would be just fine.
1 and 2.
Since he's looking at these, even though you're going to maintain them, should we just mark these? Probably just for clarity, we should mark these, even though we're not going to include them. So, you okay with that? Okay, so
I might have copies.
the whole manual. I mean,
Just, I have copies of the index. Is that what you're talking about marking?
I was just gonna mark, not physically, but mark for identification the two binders that he's looking at right now. We'll call it Exhibit 7. Let's call this Exhibit 7. We're not going to physically include it. It's the 2-volume policy manual set. I have specific policies that I may want to use that I will specifically mark.
I have no problem with that.
Okay.
Insomuch as I also assert, at this point in time, the confidentiality of same as required by our protective order.
That's fine. And if you need a few minutes, I'm not trying to rush you, but just take your time. The answer is what's important, not the length.
Well, let's address it this way. In set policies that would be in here in a policy form, I don't believe so. I'm looking at evidence collection, physical and forensic evidence collection.
Which is which one?
D.
D.
Okay.
There's a policy included on how to process, how to deliver, how to collect, but not necessarily how to collect, how to preserve. So there is on D.
So it's that's partial at least.
Yes.
Okay. For C, is there any partial policy at least written?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
Let me double check that, but I don't believe so. Let me see that one, George. There's a policy on death scene, but not crime scene protocol. You have a crime scene without a death, obviously. I don't believe there's any set policy on any of these other ones.
Even a partial?
I don't think there is such a thing as a partial
Well, I
policy.
mean, what I mean is like you said there's something in the manual, in the policies on physical and forensic evidence collection, preservation, and testing.
Preservation.
Right. So that's what I'm getting at. So there's
You can't put a policy on testing because there's so many different ways to test evidence at a crime scene. I think it would be hard to define exactly how you would try to document or how you would try to do a policy on it.
Why don't we take, since you're looking through that, and you can charge me for the time if you want, but he's got to change tapes. So why don't we take about take like a 10-minute break? You can finish answering the question. I've got to take care of something urgently, and
No objection.
It's 2:55.
So you're gonna wear a tie for the